Welcome to On Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, your host, joined by CJ Vogel and Gerry Hamilton. We're here to talk a little Longhorn sports football. Let's start there, guys, if you don't mind. Longhorns back at it today. They were in DKR for their fifth practice of the spring football campaign. A couple of injury notes. We mentioned last week, or excuse me, earlier this week, that Ryan Wingo was out with a hamstring, probably out for the remainder of spring. They're going to be very careful with him. Now we're hearing Jordan Washington, the redshirt freshman tight end out of the Cypress area down in Houston, will also likely be out to the end of spring with a shoulder issue. Longhorns getting a little dinged up, but these are not, how do I want to put it? These are not long-standing injuries, at least, that should linger into the fall camp. So from that perspective, it's kind of good, but it will give some younger players a chance to make do here. CJ, you reported to On Texas Football listeners earlier this week that the three wide receivers currently working for the Longhorns on the first string have been Parker Livingstone, Jamie French, and Dalen McCutcheon. What do you think about that move? And Gerry, I want to talk to you about this and see if you think that's something that's interesting and what this all means for the Longhorns. CJ?
Yeah, I think it's one of two things, right? Of course, you want to get Arch Manning familiar with the guys that will be catching passes in 2025. But with a couple injuries, you're also looking ahead to what could be 2026 should he stay for the 2 years in Austin. So I think it's great to kind of get these guys quickly up to speed in the spring, of course. And even when you look at last year, right? Did Sarkisian, who mentioned in his press conference in March, say, did I get a Trevor Gooseby enough reps? Did I get a Ty Anthony Smith enough reps? If you're second guessing that after 15 games, then hey, maybe it's a good thing that this is occurring right now in spring to kind of speed up that process for August 30th against Ohio State, where you're going to need some really talented wide receivers to create separation against really talented cornerbacks and the defending national champions. So it's not ideal to have guys injured, right? Not ideal to have guys missing reps with your starting quarterback in your starting offense because there is lingo and vernacular that you'd like to learn next to a left tackle and a right tackle if you're Jordan Washington. But point is, these guys are getting valuable reps for the young freshman wide receivers, including an Aaron Butler and a Parker Livingstone who have been around and are now thrust into a situation they've yet to see before. Could it pay off in the long run? Absolutely. Right now, all I know is the more reps that they're getting with Arch Manning in this first team offense, the quicker that they'll get up to speed that Texas fans hope to see them at this fall.
Gerry, a question for you. Jordan Washington's injury more significant than Ryan Wingo's from the standpoint of Arch and Wingo worked together all first year. They were both second team effectively. So they worked together. Jordan Washington's a little bit different, right? I mean, this is a guy that you want him to get that experience and going with the first unit alongside Spencer Shannon. Is that a little bit more significant injury, you think?
I don't know. Just from his, I guess, rep standpoint with a first unit it is, I think he's caught a lot of passes from Arch too. I mean, a lot of these guys' work comes in the off season, right? Just out there running routes on a day-to-day basis. That's where your timing's really built. Then it just carries over to the field. So from a passing game standpoint, I don't think it's that big of a deal. From a run game standpoint, I think that's kind of lining up in line. And as CJ said, communication with the starting left tackle, Gooseby, the starting right tackle, Brandon Baker, and just all the way down that line, I think is the biggest thing for Jordan and continuing to develop as a blocker, right? I mean, there's nothing, look, he had the redshirt year, so he worked against Colin Simmons. He worked against a lot of those guys last year. But again, there's different reps, scout team versus now you're the first team guy. So I would say from a pass catching standpoint, no. From a run blocking standpoint, just a continuity, yes. Bigger than having Ryan Wingo out. But I actually think all this, not tied in, receivers are going to be a blessing in disguise. We mentioned on Coffee and Football this morning that, Ryan Wingo and DeAndre Moore caught a lot of passes from Arch already. They were working together all last year. They were working together this year before spring practice. Now Arch gets to build trust, more than timing, trust in a couple of freshman receivers. Because those guys are going to have to play. Injuries are going to happen. And who is he going to be able to trust on 3rd and 7? next year. That's a big part of football games that are always underestimated. And that trust happens whether it's off season for a quarterback and a receiver running routes, or when they're forced into action, like in the spring, and he realizes I can audible, I can trust this guy. This guy's going to know where to be on time.
Hey, guys, look, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. My question is this: we've chronicled Parker Livingstone having a good spring so far and kind of rising through the ranks and being somebody that we think is going to enter that circle of trust for Sark. Jamie French is not a surprise. He's a highly ranked receiver coming out, a lot of talent. But the third player that's starting is Dalen McCutcheon. Does that surprise you that he's ahead of maybe Khalil Lockett and or Michael Terry, both of whom were ranked over him? I see Gerry shaking his head no.
No, because those guys are outside receivers. And Dalen McCutcheon is more in that DeAndre Moore role in position. So I think that is the key there is Khalil Lockett's an outside X guy. And I think his value is going to be vertical routes, back shoulder balls, square ends, and those sort of things working from the X. And I think Michael Terry's just – you can't put too much on his plate. He's never really played the position. You can put more on Dalen McCutcheon's plate. He played at a really good high school, was really well coached, whether that was Lavender, then on and that staff on into Todd Dodge. He's obviously trained with Margin Hooks. So those guys they come to college a little more advanced. So he's also playing that DeAndre Moore role. So I'm not surprised at all by the reps and where that's going positionally.
Oh, yeah. I am a little surprised. He's clearly ahead of Aaron Butler, too, who has a year experience on him, CJ.
Yeah, I think it might have been a surprise coming into the spring. But behind the scenes, look, I've been told that Dalen McCutcheon's caught up on the playbook very quickly since enrolling in January. That's something that had struggled quite a bit to get up to this level for Aaron Butler a year ago. Now, of course, going out on the field and proving it, that's another thing. But for Dalen, again, and for him to see that first team rotation, look, he provides something physically that the rest of that group just doesn't, right? Khalil Lockett, Michael Terry, you look at Jamie French and Parker Livingstone, bigger bodies. So is that the MO for Sarkisian now? Well, it hasn't ever been before. You know, you like to see those 5'10" to 6 foot guys that are speed demons. I'm not calling Dalen McCutcheon a speed demon, but certainly there is that role for DeAndre Moore that we saw so valuable in 2024. That's exactly what he provides. And again, for Aaron Butler, going back to him, I think it's very much one of those conversations from a year ago when you saw Jonte Cook in that first role and then seeing that slip away. You just want to see more from what his opportunities are. And so far, that's yet to be the case.
All right, good stuff. All right, we're going to move on, talk a little recruiting. But first, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, Adam Lowy of the Lowy Law Firm. If you've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind, including anything from an ATV to an 18-wheeler, and think you might be due compensation, reach out to Adam and his group at loweylawfirm.com. And this is what they do. They give you a free, no-strings-attached consultation. Call them up, talk with them. They'll let you know whether or not they think you might be due some level of compensation. Again, no strings attached, loweylawfirm.com. Thank you to Adam and his group for sponsoring On Texas Football. Guys, Texas hosting an official visitor today and yesterday, David Bailey, defensive end out of Stanford. We've talked about him on various shows here. The question is, why would Texas want a defensive end when they are already loaded to the position? Colin Simmons, Ethan Burt, Colton Vosick, Lance Jackson. They've got some good players. Is it just that David Bailey is that much better? That's what I'm hearing. Better is not the word. Is just that good that he can be a difference maker for this team? That's kind of what I'm hearing from behind the scenes, Gerry.
Yeah, no doubt. They wouldn't bring in an edge player with this edge room unless he's an elite talent. Period. I mean, that's just no chance. I mean, if you just look at Colin Simmons, you could, whether Trey Moore's working on linebacker or not, he could move right back to edge and have a high PFF grade or whatever you want to call it. Guy's a really good player. Ethan Burke on the other side, right? I will say this: injuries are also a part of this, though. As talented as Colton Vosick is, he's never been healthy at Texas. It's hard to depend on a guy to say, hey, man, he's our number 3 guy in the rotation if he very rarely is healthy. So I do think injuries are part of that as well. But Because, look, obviously, if Colton Vasek was a healthy player and he'd had 5 sacks last year in limited time, you'd be looking at this different than a guy who's out again for the spring with an injury. But I think David Bailey's an elite player. I think he's one of the elite edge prospects in college football. I mean, 7 sacks and 5 forced fumbles on a bad team speaks for itself. He's an NFL draft prospect and probably a higher round guy. I'm not saying first, but he's an elite player. And you're only bringing a guy in like this if you feel like he's a difference maker at that position because of where your room's at.
Yeah. CJ, what about you? You think this is a situation where David Bailey might have a chance to really flourish at Texas compared to maybe somewhere else he might go?
Yeah, for a long while, it took me a while to wrap my head around why they're bringing in an edge. You know, again, we just talked about it. That edge room has a lot of pieces. It's as deep as any other position on the board. And when you start looking at where this staff could have gone or where portal additions might have come from, I would have had defensive end pretty low on that list. But it makes sense. And again, it allows the staff to utilize Trey Moore a little differently. You go back, and Gerry, you mentioned 5 forced fumbles for David Bailey at Stanford. That is a different level of violence, right? When it comes to the point of contact, getting after the quarterback, those strip sacks, Texas saw that against Texas A&M. It won them the game, right? You know, those are big time plays. You go back to the Kansas State game in 2023, a game that went to overtime. Where would you be without the strip sack, right? From Ethan Burke. So stuff like that is game changing. So if that's something that you could pair opposite of a Colin Simmons or an Ethan Burke or Colton Vasek once again and keep that whole other group completely fresh on the sideline for when it's their turn to trot out there on a second or third down, why not? Absolutely. That's a heck of a prospect. And the other thing I wanted to mention, you go watch David Bailey. I'm not saying he's a cutting image of Colin Simmons, but there is a first step quickness to him that you rarely see off the edge. And right now, Texas has a pair, or you could even go trio of edge rushers with just that first step that's really hard to deal with.
I want to say this too. You go to Ohio State, you go to Georgia, and you go to Florida this year. If you said we can roll out Colin Simmons, David Bailey, and Anthony Hill to rush the passer at the same time, you strike fear into your opponents. Period. I mean, Alabama did it with Will Anderson and Dallas Turner playing opposite each other. And I'm not saying these are both first-round picks. That's to be played out. Colin Simmons definitely is. But that's a different level of playmaking and pass rushing that you can put on the field together, in my estimation, if you get David Bailey.
Yeah, we'll see. Texas also had some underclassmen recruits in. They got a commitment this week from Nicholas Robertson. We've talked at length about him, young man out of Klein High School. Down in the Houston area, big offensive lineman that was one of Gerry's infamous highs for a good period of time. We'll have more on those recruiting battles. There's some guys coming in for unofficial visits this weekend as well. I know CJ, Gerry, you guys will be on top of that. We'll talk more about that later this week. I want to switch briefly to basketball recruiting. Gerry, Texas picking up a commitment from Xavier player Dylan Swain. Tell people about him a little bit, or Dylan Swain. Tell people about him and exactly why Longhorn fans should be excited.
Yeah, 6'8", versatile forward, improving perimeter game. Made a huge jump from freshman to sophomore year. Was recruited to Xavier by Sean Miller out of Columbus, Ohio. He beat Ohio State twice on that guy, by the way, on Swain. But he averaged 11 points, 5.5 rebounds, 2.6 assists, 1.6 steals as a sophomore. Really good all-around player. Defensive versatility, he can guard 4 positions. He has switchability on your perimeter defense. Offensively, he's just starting to take off. When you look at where he's going to go with his game, the improvements he made as an offensive player, right now he's a slasher. He's a straight line driver that plays in transition. Now he made 3 threes against Illinois. After they beat Texas, he had career best game, 27 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals against Illinois in that round of 64 loss. He's really starting to elevate his game offensively. He's going to be a pro player. There's no doubt about that. The question is, what level of pro is he going to be? And that's going to be the next year or two is going to decide that on his development. He's got to get into his shot quicker, and he's got to be able to shoot at a higher percentage and take more threes on the perimeter. If he accomplishes that, he will probably be an NBA player. If that takes him longer to achieve, then he'll probably be a two-way player or a very high-paying overseas player. and see where his game builds out to. But he's grown from 6'6" to 6'8" in college. I think he's going to be a tremendous player in year 3 in college basketball. It's also good familiarity for Sean Miller as he builds his roster. There won't be much familiarity with his system coming into this team and this roster next year. But Dalen Swain's played 2 years in it and has played at a high level in year 2. So I think that's going to help some continuity for Sean Miller. I think it was a big recruiting win because there's not a lot of 6'8" guys who can guard multiple spots, have defensive versatility, and that offensive game is just kind of starting to really build. Kid's got a chance to be really good.
Well, Gerry, they also have a 5-star high school player on campus today. There's other transfer portal guys. Basketball transfer portal right now is going nuts.
It's out of control.
Yeah, and so what is the thought process right now? Give us more of a holistic look at basketball recruiting. What is Sean Miller? And by the way, they retained Chris Ogden as GM, former Longhorn player, Longhorn assistant, retained as GM. What are they trying to build? Just to give a holistic look to people.
I think the thing for the fan base is, you could go maybe overpay in the NIL market and have and maybe your first year roster looks better on paper. But then there's also the thing of this is a long-term thing. I mean, Nate Oates and Todd Golden didn't make the NCAA tournament their first year, and that's not the expectation of Sean Miller in Texas. I just want to put that out there. But you're still building. The reality in the NIL space right now, because it's so crazy in basketball, you can go get one of their highly ranked one-year players that have 1 year left more than likely. And you're going to be paying close to $3 million for one player. Or you could get 2 players for that, and more than likely they're going to be there multiple years. And so I think all these colleges juggle that on some level. Now, if you're Bruce Pearl and you had a missing piece and you went and got the Georgia Tech guard for 1 year around multi-year guys, I think at some point Sean Miller will get to that point. But right now, I don't think you rush to build the year 1 team. I think you rush to build your year 2 and 3 team. That's where I think this is at. You want to make the tournament in year 1. You want to have success. I'm not saying that, but you really want to set yourselves up for year 2 and year 3 here. I think taking a bunch of 1-year guys. I mean, could you imagine paying $3 million for somebody and he tears ligaments in his foot the first week of practice, he's out for the year? So then you'd be sitting there saying, dang it, we knew we should have taken 2 really good players for that price who would be here longer. We could develop those guys. I think that's the battle all these college coaches face, unless they've been there a while and they have their team set, and maybe one guy would make the difference in their team, going to a Final Four or losing to the Sweet 16. That's a different scenario. But when you get these jobs and when you're starting these jobs, I think that's the thing you have to really navigate is, do you go for the 1-year guy in the NIL or do you spend that same spend is worth 2 players that you can develop over time? I think that's where all these college coaches have those difficult decisions to make in basketball.
All right, stepping away from basketball and football for a minute. Big news on the hard court from the women's team. They go to Tampa on Friday. We had Coach Vic Schaefer on Coffee and Football on Wednesday morning. He's clearly in game mode, but they came away with a big win in the Elite Eight on Monday night against TCU. Now they have South Carolina for a 4th time this year. Unbelievable. I can't believe that you play somebody 4 times. He said he's actually done it once before while he was at Mississippi State. He played South Carolina 4 times. But this is a big moment for Texas women's basketball. First time in 20 years the Longhorns have been back to the Final Four. Vic Schaefer, not his first experience at the Final Four, but a big one. Also, men's baseball, CJ, they lost a tilt with Texas State last night. You in the whole no-hit thing. What the heck, CJ? I was told to take you to task for mentioning that.
The chat got after you this morning, CJ.
They scored a run.
Hey, in all seriousness, Jim Schlossnagle's guys face a Georgia team that's a top 5 Georgia team coming to Dish Falk this weekend. This is where his 8-1 record in conference play. The team's 8-1 record is going to be tested, and the Longhorns are without Max Ballou, the young man that hurt himself, was a National Player of the Year. What does Texas got to do on the baseball diamond, CJ, you think, to keep this rate up of being 8-1 in the SEC in year one?
Well, they got to play good defense, and I think that was the Achilles heel last night, Bobby. You start looking at that eighth inning when Texas State was able to pour in 5 runs. You had a dropped pop-up in center field. You had an error at third base. That extended the inning. The next thing you know, they're trotting around 3 runs on a home run that put this game out of reach for Texas. So got to play good defense behind them, and you got to have timely hits, right? I think by now we feel like the Texas pitching staff, at least for Friday, Saturday with Luke Harrison and Jared Spencer, they're going to go get you 6, potentially 7 innings of really solid baseball on the mound. Big question is, does the timely hitting stand up? And without potentially a Max Ballou and Adrian Rodriguez, and we'll see what level of health Rylan Galvan is at, you're going to have to ask some guys from the bottom of the lineup to stand up who haven't necessarily done that a whole lot this year. Now, Will Gasparino has been tremendous over the last 10 days or so, but can that sustain against a Georgia team who you mentioned number 3 in the country, and they love to score runs, 2.7 home runs per game. That's as good as anybody in the country.
I want to add this, Bobby, real quick on the women's basketball. It's Vic, 4th Final Four in Texas history, right? I think his 3rd as a head coach. Texas only played in 1 national championship game. And that was the year they won at 86, obviously Jody Conrad. The next year they lost in the semifinals. 03, they lost in the semifinals. So Texas, if they can beat South Carolina Friday, will appear in their 2nd national championship game of all time in the program.
Yeah, good luck to Vic Schaefer and his girls. I'm going to be watching it 6 o'clock Friday night. Hey, Gerry and CJ, I want to step back to football recruiting, if you don't mind. Texas got a commitment from Nick Robertson, big lineman, on Monday. You have any football recruiting predictions or what you foresee over the next week or two for Texas football recruiting? Gerry, I'll start with you.
Nothing major for me, I don't think. Look, I think Richard Wesley will schedule an official visit to Texas, the 5-star edge out of Sierra Canyon. I think Jet Washington's scheduled to be on campus at some point later this weekend. I think you'll see him schedule an official visit. I think the next piece for Texas recruiting, it's not really a prediction, it's just the continued official visit process and how that kind of started happening with Jamie French, Myron Charles, Josiah Sharman, some of those guys in the last class. If I was forced to make a prediction for this class right now, I would say this may be the first class in history that has more out-of-state versus in-state signings.
That's interesting. CJ, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. Of course, you get the commitment for Max Wright and now Nicholas Robertson. You got 2 offensive linemen in the fold. Does that speed up anything for some of these out-of-state guys, right? You look at Rosenborough, you look at Sam Utu. I mean, these guys might be feeling some heat, some pressure from the outside, especially when you start considering that a Felix Ojo can just make the trip down and is expected on Friday at campus for practice number 6 of the spring. Does that speed up anything? Does a turn time, does an Ojo, does anybody in the in-state feel like they need to jump in and secure their spot in the boat already? That's going to be interesting because Texas, as you mentioned, Gerry, they're going heavy out of state. They got a lot of official visitors set up already. Is there pressure early, especially on that offensive line, which has already kind of figured out its top priorities? Do they start to make some movement over the next month or so?
I want to add this. We're also waiting on David Bailey. Y'all were talking about high school recruiting, which is, primary this time of year. And we're also waiting on David Bailey, the edge out of Stanford. He could make his decision as early as this week. Texas Tech, UCLA, some other schools involved there. But what I want to say is we're exactly 2 weeks away from the transfer portal opening for football. Okay? So April 16th is when it opens, closes on April 25th. What I would say to that is based on what we're seeing and some of the injuries at this point for Texas, tight end, wide receiver, defensive tackle, any other spots y'all think Texas might look at in the portal?
I wonder if they look at multiple wide receivers. And again, we talked about how impressive this freshman group has been, how much talent they have. You don't have a current reception on the campus of guys going through spring practice at the moment. And then kicker. I don't yet, no. We haven't heard a whole lot about Bert Auburn or Will Stone, but I know that's a topic that's not going to go away anytime soon until this team trots out and you see a kick go through the uprights against a team that's not wearing burnt orange and white.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think outside of quarterback, running back, offensive line, if a player deemed to be a difference maker jumped in the portal,
just a stud,
they're not gonna just say, no, we don't even need to look at it.
Yeah, I think about it. What parts could they look at? Maybe a corner that's got a draftable grade to sit opposite Manny Muhammad, right? Nickel, if Jalen Gilbo sticks at corner. There's some pieces in there that are kind of movable, but I think that y'all are right on about certain spots at this point.
Look, I mean, the reality is if they're looking at an edge, then they're going to look at almost anything.
Anybody, yes, I completely agree. If they think a guy can make a difference, they're going to add him. And I go back to Andrew Makuba last year. I've said this in multiple shows now. They didn't have to have a safety last year. I mean, if you looked at the roster, you had Derek Williams coming back. You had Michael Taft. You had Jelani McDonald kind of burgeoning and coming on. They went and added Andrew Makuba. Pretty good decision in retrospect, right?
This is all before any attrition, right? And we've talked about Texas sitting right in the low 80s in terms of scholarship count. They have room, but potential more room when that window opens up as well.
Yeah, we'll see exactly, because we haven't talked about attrition for Texas much. I don't expect a lot of it, but I could see 4 to 5, 6, 7, something like that, leaving whenever the portal opens. All right, that's going to do it. Thanks again to our sponsor. That's Adam Lowy over at the Lowy Law Firm. If you've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind, give Adam and his group a shout. LowyLawFirm.com. Adam, thank you very much for your ongoing support of On Texas Football and making these shows possible. For Gerry Hamilton, as well as CJ Vogel, I'm Bobby Burton. Thanks for watching. That's been Stay of the Program. Hook 'em.